Your butter looks fine. It sits in your fridge for weeks and nothing about it seems wrong, but looks are deceiving. Medieval Irish farmers buried butter in wooden barrels in peat bogs. Archaeologists are still pulling those barrels out of the ground today. Some of them are over 1,000 years old, and the butter inside is still chemically intact, still edible, and your butter will outlast theirs on a shelf. But inside your body, it delivers a fraction of what theirs did. So, the question is not how long your butter lasts. The question is what it actually does when you eat it. And the answer is what Big Dairy has spent decades making sure you never ask. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what was removed from your butter, why it was removed, and what's costing your body every single day. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The answer involves a vitamin so powerful that medieval peasants who ate real butter almost never died of heart disease, the same heart disease that is now the #1 killer in the modern world. It also involves an anti-inflammatory compound your body is almost certainly not getting, and an enzyme that was quietly destroyed in the name of shelf life and never replaced. 3 things got removed, 3 consequences your doctor is treating without ever asking why they started. Stay with me. Before we get to the bogs and the chemistry, you need to understand what your butter actually is, because it is not what you think it is, and the gap between what you think you are eating and what you are actually eating is the gap this entire video is about. Modern commercial butter starts with grain-fed cows, not cows standing in pastures eating grass the way every dairy cow in human history ate before the industrial era. Cows in confinement operations fed a diet of corn and soy engineered to maximize milk production in minimum time at minimum cost. According to the USDA's National Animal Health Monitoring System Dairy 2014 report, which surveyed operations representing more than 80% of U.S. dairy cows, 59% of operations housed cows in full confinement with no pasture access. A 2022 USDA Census of Agriculture analysis found that farms with more than 1,000 cows now produce 67% of all U.S. milk, with less than a quarter of the milk supply coming from farms with fewer than 500 head. The industry has not been moving towards smaller pasture-based operations. It has been moving in exactly the opposite direction. These are not farms in any sense of your great-grandmother would recognize. They are facilities that happen to contain animals optimized for output rather than the health of the animal or the nutritional quality of what it produces. The milk from these cows is then pasteurized at high heat, typically between 161 to 212 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on the method used. Pasteurization was introduced in the late 19th century as a genuine public health response to the unsanitary conditions of industrial urban dairies. And it does what it claims to do. It kills dangerous pathogens, but it does not only kill pathogens, it also inactivates naturally occurring enzymes, which help to break down fats before digestion. It denatures whey proteins, it alters the fat structure of the cream in ways that change how your body processes what you're eating, and that process that makes the product safer to ship also makes it measurably less useful for your biology. Both things are simultaneously true, and the industry prefers you only know about the first one. After pasteurization, the cream is churned into butter, sometimes colored with something to achieve the yellow appearance that consumers associate with quality and richness, and then packaged for retail. The yellow color of real butter comes from beta-carotene that's absorbed from grass. Most commercial butter contains little to absolutely no beta-carotene because the cows that it came from ate little to no grass. The color you see on the wrapper is frequently not telling you anything true about the animal that made it. It's telling you about the dye that was then added after the fact to make you feel like it's the real thing. That is not a minor cosmetic detail, that is the product lying to you about its own identity on the outside of the packaging. Legally, commercial butter in the United States is permitted to contain added coloring agents, added flavoring compounds, added salt at unregulated quantities, and chemicals for color and artificial flavor. Natural flavor, an industry term which can legally cover dozens of undisclosed compounds, And these are not hypothetical additions. They're standard commercial practice. It's not required to disclose the feed composition of the cows that the butter came from. It is not required to tell you whether the cream was ultra-pasteurized at higher temperatures that destroy even more biological activity than your standard pasteurization. The label that says butter tells you almost nothing about what's inside the wrapper beyond the basic category. Everything that matters, the feed, the processing temperature, the presence or absence of living enzymes, the K2 content, the CLA content, none of it is required to appear anywhere that you can read it. What you put on your bread every morning has been heated, altered, colored, and processed so far from its original state that the medieval Irish farmer who buried real butter in a bog for long-term storage would not even recognize it as the same food. And that distance is not accidental. It is the product of a century of industrial decisions made in the interest of cost, scale, and shelf life, and not in the interest of the person who's eating it. Now, let's talk about what real butter actually was, because medieval butter was not only food, it was medicine, currency, and preservation technology simultaneously, and understanding all three is what makes the story worth telling. Over 100 samples of bog butter have been found across Ireland and Scotland, some dating back over 3,000 years, and they're pulled from peat bogs still chemically intact. The Cashel bog butter excavated in Tipperary, Ireland in 2009 is estimated to be over 5,000 years old and weighed approximately 10 kilos when it was found. It's now held in the National Museum of Ireland. These are not curiosities. They are evidence of a food culture that understood preservation at a molecular level without having the molecular language to describe what it was doing or why it worked. The peat bog created a nearly perfect preservation environment through the interaction of four specific factors. First, there was low oxygen. The anaerobic conditions of the bog prevented the oxidation processes that degrade fats in open air. Oxidation will turn fats rancid. Remove the oxygen, and you remove the primary mechanism of fat degradation. Second, the low temperature. Bog temperatures stay consistently cold year-round, slowing any kind of biological activity that might otherwise cause deterioration over time. Third, there is the acidic pH level. That moss that characterizes peat bogs also produces an environment with a pH that typically sits somewhere between 3.5 to 4.5, and that inhibits bacterial growth with remarkable effectiveness. Most bacteria that decomposes organic matter cannot function in that level of acidity. Fourth, antimicrobial tannins. The organic compounds present in peat have natural antimicrobial properties that create an additional barrier against the activity that would normally break down organic matter across centuries. The medieval farmers who buried their butter in bogs did not know the chemistry behind any of these factors. They just knew the results. The butter came out intact, and that was enough for them. In medieval Europe, butter was not only eaten, it was also used as currency. Medieval Irish and Scottish records document butter paid as rent, offered to churches and monasteries as tribute, and traded at markets by weight. The Brehon Laws, the ancient Irish legal code compiled between the 7th and 9th centuries, lists butter as a standard unit of value in land transactions and dispute settlements. A food that functions as money is a food that society decided is worth more than the act of eating it. It is worth storing, protecting, and burying in a bog for retrieval when the need arose. The people who treated butter this way were not primitive or even superstitious. They were rational people who understood the value of what they had, and they acted accordingly. But now, here's where modern science catches up to that intuition and confirms it with numbers. Grass-fed butter, the only kind of butter that existed before the industrial era, is nutritionally distinct from grain-fed commercial butter in several specific and thoroughly documented ways. The first, vitamin K2. Grass-fed butter contains up to 5 times more vitamin K2 than grain-fed commercial butter. That figure comes from research published in the journal Nutrients, including a 2012 analysis confirming significantly higher K2 concentrations in dairy fat from pasture-raised animals compared to grain-fed equivalents. Vitamin K2 is not the same as vitamin K1, which is the clotting vitamin that most people have encountered. K2 performs an entirely different function. It activates proteins that direct calcium into bones and teeth and away from arteries and soft tissue where calcium causes damage. Without adequate K2, calcium absorbed from food deposits in blood vessel walls. That process, arterial calcification, is a primary driver of cardiovascular disease. Medieval peasants who ate grass-fed butter every day were receiving K2 in quantities that the modern diet almost never delivers. The same cardiovascular disease that kills more people in the modern world than any other condition was not the epidemic then that it is now. The food changed, the disease followed, and grass-fed butter contains up to 5 times more vitamin K2 than modern commercial butter. That is the vitamin your arteries need to stay clear, and it is almost entirely absent from what's sitting in your fridge right now. The second compound is CLA, conjugated linoleic acid. Grass-fed butter is one of the richest dietary sources of CLA available. A 2010 meta-analysis published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that CLA intake was associated with reduced body fat, improved immune function, and significant anti-inflammatory effects. The CLA content of butter from pasture-raised cows is between 3 to 5 times higher than the CLA content of butter from grain-fed cows, according to research published in the Journal of Dairy Science. Medieval people who were eating grass-fed butter as a daily staple were receiving consistent anti-inflammatory input from their food. You are almost certainly not. The third is lipase. Raw butter, butter that has not been pasteurized, contains active lipase, the enzyme that helps your body break down and absorb fat efficiently. Pasteurization destroys lipase entirely. This is not a contested point in food science. It's a straightforward consequence of applying heat above a specific threshold to a biological enzyme that denatures at that temperature. Raw butter contains an enzyme called lipase that helps your body break down and absorb fat. Pasteurization destroys it entirely. Every pat of commercial butter you eat is a pat your body has to work harder to process than nature intended. None of this is secret research buried in obscure journals. The studies are published, peer-reviewed, and accessible to anyone who looks for them. The reason most people have never heard of K2 deficiency, CLA depletion, or lipase destruction in the context of their daily butter is not that the science is unclear. It's that the science does not benefit the companies that are selling grain-fed pasteurized butter at industrial scale. Information that serves your health, but costs someone else their margin, has a way of not traveling very far. Medieval people did not have cardiologists, they did not have cholesterol medication, they did not have bypass surgery. They had real butter from grass-fed cows, and they ate it every single day without fear. Today, butter is controversial. Heart disease is an epidemic. Ask yourself what changed. Your body hasn't changed. Your food has. Real butter is an investment. The yellow stick in your fridge is a tax. The low-fat movement of the 70s and 80s told you that butter was the enemy. That movement was built substantially on the 7 countries study by Ansel Keys. In her 2014 book, The Big Fat Surprise, investigative journalist Nina Teakoltz argued that Keys chose countries he knew would support his hypothesis, while omitting France, Germany, and Switzerland, where people ate far more saturated fat but had equally low rates of heart disease. The book's claims were debated in The Lancet. What is not disputed is that the policy it challenged told a generation to swap butter for margarine, and margarine's core ingredient, partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, was ruled a direct cardiovascular risk by the FDA in 2015 and removed from the food supply entirely. What you put on your bread every morning is either building your body or slowly breaking it down. Real butter from grass-fed cows, eaten the way that humans ate it for 10,000 years before the industrial era, is an investment in your cardiovascular system, your bone density, and your metabolic health. The yellow stick wrapped up in foil in your fridge is a product optimized for cost, shelf life, and industrial throughput. It is not the same food. It is using the same word. Medieval people did not have a word for the difference because there was no difference to describe. There was only one kind of butter, and it came from a cow that ate grass. That simplicity was not a limitation. It was the entire point. That distinction is worth understanding before you reach for it again tomorrow morning. We did not stop eating real butter because the science said it was bad. We stopped because it was inconvenient. Grass-fed cows are more expensive to raise than confined grain-fed cows. Raw butter is harder to ship and more difficult to standardize than pasteurized butter. Pasteurization extended shelf life, and shelf life means profit at scale. So the industry made the switch, and the marketing produced the story that made the switch acceptable to consumers who had no reason to question it. Margarine was invented in 1869, and later versions made with partially hydrogenated vegetable oils were marketed for much of the 20th century as a modern alternative to butter. Those same partially hydrogenated oils are now known as trans fats, and the FDA mandated their removal from the food supply in 2015 on the grounds that they posed a direct risk to cardiovascular health. The product that replaced butter, in the name of heart health, turned out to be worse for your heart than the butter ever was. The correction took roughly a century to arrive. Our ancestors did not fear butter, they revered it. They buried it like treasures because they understood the value. They paid their rent with it. They offered it to their churches. They preserved it across centuries using nothing more than a wooden barrel and the chemistry of a peat bog. We took all of that understanding, stripped everything of value out of it through heat and industrial processing, dyed it to look like the original, and then stuffed it into a foil wrapper. Then we wondered why our hearts are failing. The answer was never complicated. It was the food changed and the disease followed the food. Here is what you can do about it starting this week. First, find real butter. Grass-fed, cultured, and raw if it's legal in your state. The most accessible grass-fed option available in most American grocery stores is Kerrygold, which is produced from Irish pasture-raised cows and contains significantly higher levels of K2 and CLA than standard commercial butter. If you want to go further, look for raw grass-fed butter from local farms or specialist retailers. Know what the label means. Grass-fed is not a regulated term in the United States the way that organic is, so ask the source. Check the farm. A genuine grass-fed product will come from an animal that spent the majority of its life out on the pasture, and not one that received occasional access to an outdoor area between grain feeding sessions and was labeled grass-fed anyway. Second, make it yourself. Medieval farmers churn butter by hand with nothing more than cream and thyme, and you can do the same in your own kitchen in under 20 minutes. Take 1 pint of heavy cream from the best grass-fed source you can legally and safely access, pour it into a jar with a tight-fitting lid, and shake it up. Keep on shaking, and after roughly 10 to 15 minutes, the cream will separate into a solid butter and liquid buttermilk. Pour off the buttermilk, rinse the butter under cold water while working it with a spoon to remove any remaining liquid. Add in a pinch of salt if you prefer it salted, and then you're done. Real butter, 1 ingredient, no factory, no pasteurization, and no added flavorings or chemicals or colors. The medieval farmers who made it were not doing anything that your hands could not do on a Sunday afternoon with a mason jar. Third, learn to read the wrapper. Commercial butter should contain cream and salt and nothing else. If the ingredient list includes anything beyond those 2 items, put it back on the shelf. Colorings, flavorings, preservatives, stabilizers, all of them have no legitimate place in butter. Their presence tells you the product was engineered for appearance and shelf stability rather than for its nutritional integrity. The more simple the label, the closer the product is to the original food. That principle applies to butter and to almost everything else in the grocery store. Medieval butter was food that was designed to nourish. Yours is a product designed to sell. Our ancestors buried it in the ground for 1,000 years, and it came out intact because the food itself was intact. The fat was real, the enzymes were alive, the nutrients were present in concentrations that the human body evolved over a millennia to receive. Modern commercial butter looks the same sitting on your counter. It will outlast theirs on a shelf, but every compound that made the original worth burying, worth paying rent with, worth offering to your church, and worth preserving in a peat bog across centuries has been heated away, engineered out, or replaced with a cheaper substitute that serves the producer and not the person eating it. You did not choose that trade. It was made for you before you were born, in industrial facilities and corporate decisions designed to optimize cost and margin rather than nutrition and health. The farmers who buried butter in bogs were not sophisticated people by modern standards. They did not have food science degrees, nor did they have peer-reviewed journals or regulatory agencies to tell them what was safe to eat. All they had was a direct relationship with their food and understanding built through generations that what you put into your body determines what your body can do. That understanding is worth recovering. It does not require a return to peat bogs. It requires reading a label, asking a question about where your food comes from, and being willing to pay slightly more for something that is actually what it says it is. The choice is yours, really. Subscribe, and let us keep on digging up what they buried.